Academy for Leadership in Teacher Education International Webinar Series for Exemplary Scholarship. We are honored to have Professor Yong Zhao of the School of Education at the University of Kansas, USA, and Melbourne Graduate School of Education at University of Melbourne, Australia with us today to deliver a lecture titled Reach for Greatness, Personalisable Education for All. Today's lecture is organized by the Faculty of Education, the University of Hong Kong. My name is Crystal and I'm the MC of today. Before we start, I would like to introduce some house rules. First of all, in order to avoid unnecessary noise throughout the session, we have muted all of you and your cameras are turned off as the default setting. This lecture is also broadcast live from our faculty Facebook page and YouTube channel. It will also be recorded for uploading onto different faculty online platforms after the lecture as well. The Q&A session is exclusive for participants who have registered for this webinar. In this session, please type your questions in the Q&A chat box so that we can help you ask the questions. The raise hand function will not be responded. For the rundown, Professor Zhao will deliver the lecture for around an hour. After that, there will be around 30 minutes for the Q&A session. Now, may I invite Professor Aileen Goodwin, Dean of Faculty of Education, to give a welcome remarks. Professor Goodwin, please.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Good morning, everyone, and good evening to my, what time is it over there now? It's sort of early evening, about 6 o'clock?
6:30.
6:30. So good evening to Professor Yong Zhao, who is joining us today and is our invited speaker for this ALiTE series. I would like to just give you a brief bio and then just add a couple of comments from my own knowledge of Professor Zhao and the work that we've done together. So Professor Yong Zhao is a Foundation Distinguished Professor in the School of Education at the University of Kansas in the US. And he is also a professor in educational leadership at Melbourne Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Although currently he is in Oregon. So in these days of COVID, we can be sort of many places simultaneously. He previously served as the presidential chair and director of the Institute for Global and Online Education in the College of Education at the University of Oregon, where he was also a professor in the Department of Educational Measurement, Policy, and Leadership. Prior to that, he was University Distinguished Professor at the College of Education at Michigan State University, where he also served as the founding director for the Center for Teaching and Technology, executive director of the Confucius Institute, as well as the U.S.-China Center for Research on Educational Excellence. So as you can tell, first the word distinguished is usually attached to Professor Yong Zhao's name. He has held many, many distinguished positions and has done a lot of groundbreaking work in many places in the world. Professor Zhao's work focuses on the implications of globalization and technology on education, particularly relevant during these days and times. He has published well over 100 articles and 30 books, including Counting What Counts, Reframing Education Outcomes, Never Send a Human to Do a Machine's Job, Correcting Top 5 EdTech Mistakes. Love that title. Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Dragon? Why China has the best and worst education system in the world. Catching Up or Leading the Way, American Education in the Age of Globalization, and World-Class Learners, Educating Creative and Entrepreneurial Students. You can certainly visit his website for more information, and you will always find that Professor Zhao will provoke you. He will cause you to question. He will present things from an angle and perspective that you did not consider before, and he will really, engage you in some deep thinking. That is why I'm so delighted that he is here today. And a couple of things I'd like to add to this illustrious bio is that Professor Zhao is one of the conveners, and I think one of the original instigators and imaginers of the Global Education Deans Forum that started 3 years ago now, I think, and brings together about 40 deans from top research intensive schools of education around the world Unfortunately, this year we had to meet online, but it has been a really invigorating and intellectual group. The other thing that you'll want to pay attention to is his work in Silver Lining for Learning, which is a weekly webinar series that looks at current issues and engages in conversation with sort of thought leaders, practitioners, researchers from around the world, looking at education and reimagining it, given, in some sense, the crisis, and in other sense, the opportunity that the pandemic has presented. So, Yong, so lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for being here. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Professor Goodwin. As you know, how much I admire your work, as well as the work of the University of Hong Kong. I wish I could be there to interact with all the audience, with you more fully. And unfortunately, we're not able to do that. You know, as I was talking to you, during COVID, I want to invite actually all of the audience to think about our interactions. On the one hand, we're interacting with more people. On the other hand, all the interactions quality has dropped. So what would you like to do? What would you not like to do? And today I'm so fortunate and so honored to have the chance to share with you my thoughts, my reasoning, what I've been thinking about in education. And really the main thing, I have this title. This title came up from a book I wrote 2 years ago. It's really from a big reflection of my life. I've used to pursue how to use technology to improve education, how globalization can improve education. But really, after so many years, after you examine all the education reforms, education really has not moved much. That's the first thing. That is, I was examining the US data, NAEP data. I was examining the international data, PISA and TIMSS. And I was examining the Australia data and NAPLAN data, all this big set of data. You don't see education move massively over the last 30 years. I cannot say 50, but 30 years. The idea of equity has not solved either. That's groups of students, the gap still remains. The average scores still remains. Why is that? Now think about that. Hong Kong has done a lot of education reforms. We've done a lot of educational research. We've been training our teachers. But honestly, if we ask ourselves, how has education changed over the last 30 years that has truly made education quality go up? Just look at the basic indicators. The basic data we collect are of reading and math. I have not seen massive changes. So what is the issue? We've touched all the reforms changes, have touched all the core things in education. We've changed curriculum. We've changed teachers. We've forced them to be more accountable. We've changed our assessments. We've played with a lot of things. The only thing that we have not touched are students. Our schools have been strengthened, but our students, their learning haven't changed. We have not involved our students as learners. So that's why today I'm going to really talk a little bit about that. So the first thing I want to say is, what's the biggest problem in our schools? The biggest problem in our schools are children. Without children, our schools would be perfect. Without kids, it would be perfect. And the children are our biggest problem. Why? Why is that? So let's think about that. It's see if we have that's the book I wrote, and that's was going to about 2 years ago. So you have children. Now, when you look at a child like this, we have two different approaches to look at this child. One is that you immediately began to dream, what will this child become? As parents, as teachers, I want this person to be a lawyer, to be an accountant, to be a doctor, to be whatever you like. That's one model. So if you want that person to be like that, engineer, what do? You begin to think about What should this person learn? What knowledge, what skills, what school you want to go? So that's what I call a very authoritarian approach to say, what would they want to, what I want you to be. Another approach is that, what does this child have? We don't know, it's a he or a she, we don't know. So what if we follow the child? So the children have become the problems because, number one, this child has intention. This child is a natural learner. This child with others are diverse learners. So we have children who are very different. So that's our biggest problem, because schools want them to be different. So let me explain a little bit how our children are natural born learners. Remember, human beings are quite unlike some other animals. What we have is something called creativity, or some people would call that the ability to learn. The ability to learn is really creativity. It is what you think. You can use your talent to address the unknown problems, the uncertainties. That's the key to learn. That's the key to how we learn new things. We have the capacity. So every human being is a natural born learner. Number two, we are very diverse learners. Students are very different in that regard. And number three, students are very intentional learners. We are born into a lot of different things, but we focus on things that matter. So that becomes the problem to our schools. Because if you look at it in human learning, we basically are dealing with what you're born with and what your experience is. We used to debate. Think about John Dewey and B.F. Skinner. They would be debating about, the psychologist say, okay, I can teach you everything, or are you born with everything? That's why today we have really two different groups. In education, we'd like to think we can teach you anything. And I believe that too, but not really. And at the same time, we have a lot of psychologists kept talking about, oh, your personality matters. What you're born matters. IQ matters. That's what I call it. How smart you are, we go to IQ. So you measure something, hopefully it's going to drive your life. This book is not necessarily the best book for this idea, but it's one of the first ones to really give a very good explanation to say, nature, that is what you're born with, is expressed or suppressed by nurture. So, for example, if you're born to be 1.7 meters high, if you don't have enough food as part of the experience, you probably won't be 1.7 meters high. But if you're born to be 1.7 meters, no matter how much food you eat, you won't become 1.9 meters. So that's the basic idea. So you're constrained by what you are born with. You are also supported by that. And this matters a lot in our teaching and learning today. Before, it did not really matter because we want individuals just to be good enough or mediocre, not to be great, because our old society did not demand that. But today it actually matters. So on the one hand, for example, you say, well, we can learn anything. I can teach you anything. Yes, you can teach anyone to be able to paint. You can really teach everyone to be paint, but not everyone can become a Picasso. So that's the thing. No. Yes, you can teach anything, but do you think you should be teaching anyone anything? Because we have nature as the controlling aspect of it. Human nurture changes too. So that's why we have, I'm just going to run this quickly through. Many of you are familiar with Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, which is, I don't agree with how he labeled everything, because he basing a label based on what we know. Human beings actually are diverse in many different ways. This is how diverse we can be. And also, these are not learning styles. Don't get that wrong. These are your intelligence. That, for example, some people are actually born with the eyesight that's a better decipher color patterns. That means you're more likely to be a visual artist. Some of you have more sensitive ears. I know some of you are more sensitive to sound, to different levels. That gives you a chance to become artist. However, none of this would matter if you're born into an environment where you don't have any opportunity. I thought I could have become a Justin Bieber in China, but never had the chance. I was born in a little village in China, no access to music. So there's no way I could even know I was good or bad at music. That's why, early years, triggering your children's talent in a domain is extremely important, triggering that. But of course, you need time to change this. But let's just stop thinking about this. Is the cognitively, we are born with a diversity of talents. Also, personality-wise, if you go through the personality literature, human children are 2 to 3 year olds, their personality is already shaped to certain degrees. You run into people, some people are extremely quiet, withdrawing, they're not assertive, but others are quite outgoing and energetic and gregarious. You know that. In life, actually, people are different. They have different personalities. And that personalities can be suppressed, of course. As I said, education is the same way. Even if you are, really, tone deaf, I can still teach you to sing. Not very good, but I can teach you to sing. The same thing with the personality. I can suppress you. In a culture, it's okay. I can force more outgoing, more energetic, but it's better for you to be quieter. If you can pretend to do certain things. So remember, this is that's the part of this. And of course, we are also know this is from Stephen Rice from Ohio State, who had passed away already. Talks a lot about the human basic desires. This is the driving things. What do you want? What drives you to do certain things? There are 16 basic desires. Somebody pursues power. Their power influencing others is most important to them. J. Edgar Hoover, Donald Trump, they're type of those, and they are driven maybe 90% of their motivation is about power. That's why you say Trump still hasn't conceded. He wants to influence, he wants to be the boss. Then you have other people who may be curiosity. The paparazzis, the scientists, all of those are driven by curiosity. So Trump is just the opposite. Trump is driven only by power, but has no curiosity. He doesn't want to know anything, doesn't want to learn anything. It's interesting. But there's a lot of people driven by curiosity. Some are driven by saving things, others driven by honor. So those are the natural born differences we know of so far. Diverse, different. Everybody is different personality, different cognitive style, and different desires. Then if you add to our diverse experiences, where are you born with? What schools do you go to? What do we value? This is actually a very interesting example. If you look at Hong Kong, Hong Kong has been very diverse. Hong Kong used to be the suppliers of music, dancing, new art for mainland China. And during the end of Cultural Revolution, because the whole culture did not support all the dancing, all the art, all the music, all the creativity, a lot of those talents were suppressed. But today, after the reform and open door policy, China is on the rise. Hong Kong still plays a role, but the role has been declining. China has 1.4 billion people. By accident, you would have more talents in those domains. They're just waiting for the opportunities and experiences and the schools to thrive. So what do you want to give your children when, as a family, as a community, when they come to school? Our children, they are drastically different. Now in our schools, so our problem is that, why are those problems? We have people like this. They have a jagged profile of talent. every person has a jagged profile of talent. That is, you're going to be tall, you're going to be short, you're going to have a bigger stomach or shorter stomach. So every human being, I'm looking at the Professor Lynn Goodwin here, she has a jagged profile. She has her own interest, her own strength, her own passions, her own experience. It makes a different person. Now, but what do schools want? Schools want this. When you come to school, we have schooling. Schools have an outcome that's been outlined in all the government documents called curriculum. In a curriculum or learning profile, we want students to be able to do this, this, and this. So what do? You suppress that. And this is why with the international tests like PISA, like TIMSS, like also all the international testing, you have a problem. You want children to be the same. Societies that suppress better get better international test scores. That's, it's really, you look at mainland China, look at the Korea, Japan, most East Asian education systems, including Hong Kong and Singapore, have traditionally produced higher test scores because we suppress better. And, people used to say, oh, the US has teach education or creativity better. US doesn't teach creativity any better. We just don't kill it as successfully. We have a broader system. We don't kill it. I don't have time to explain that, but we have a broader field. So in this way, school try to make everybody the same, but they're not the same. So that's why our first problem in schools with kids is they are different. We want to homogenize them, but they're different. This is why the so-called achievement gaps. There are people behind, there are people forward. You look at all our schools, we spend lots of time dealing with this issue of diversity. We try to divide them into gifted and talented students, special education students, left behind students. We try to deal with them, put them into smaller groups. We do discrimination. We have all those plans to do this. We keep them, retain them for grade. All of this we're trying to suppress humanity, suppress human nature, which was very necessary because for a long time, human society indeed required a massive number of people with similar skills and knowledge, not at a high level. If you go work for Henry Ford, you don't need Lady Gaga, okay? Lady Gaga is useless for Henry Ford because Ford doesn't need any of those. Think about those big factories, which Hong Kong kind of outsourced back to China in the 1990s and 1980s is there. So that's where, our trouble. Second trouble with students is that students are intentional, but we want students to move at the same speed. If you look at our schools, we're still organized by age. We know no matter how you organize, an age is still 1 year of difference. So you can chop the age by September to August or December to next November. It's still 1 year of gap. But even with that, we want to move them forward. I was joking with people, I said, have you thought about the idea of throwing birds? Imagine you have a dead bird. You throw the dead bird into the air, you can practically predict the trajectory, where the bird would lie. But if you are throwing a live bird, the live bird works. The live bird will disrupt your plan. That's what our children are. Our children are intentional individuals. I know in Hong Kong, East Asia, I'm from China. If you force them hard enough, children might follow you better. But at the same time, they give up something else. So in this regard, I've laid out the first thing that human nature is intentional, natural born, diverse learners, and intentional learners. That's what we have. When children come to school like this, our traditional education is trying to fight against that. And then we have a curriculum to compress them, which have not been very successful, globally speaking. They want to think about, this is what I learned about 10 years ago. I wrote all this in my book to say, what we did wrong. So that's the time when I began to debate about education. Then I want to come to another point I want to make about education. What creates a good education? You probably know all this 2009 PISA results is very much like the same 2019 results. So I did not even update. It's about the same. You know, where's America? America is nowhere. So one of the things people say, okay, America needs education reform. Lots of people saying this because American education is getting worse, is going bad. I said, no, American education is not getting worse, it's not going bad. It has always been bad. American education has been bad in terms of test scores for a long time. If you look at this data, this is the US data. From the 1960s, first international mathematics study, American 12th graders ranked 12th out of 12 countries. And that was pretty bad. If you know math, that's very bad. And if you go on, America's never been really good. But now you want to say, if it had really been that bad, the US should not even exist anymore. Let alone the US still manufactures most of the innovations come from the US. The countries has been moving forward. Even Trump has messed up America, but still the country is moving forward. It's amazing. It's also, how did that happen? What happens to education? Did education matter that much? Or what does it mean? So I've been looking at the question from that book. So why is America still here? So I've been looking at some data. And remember that this model, okay, trying to change that. So I look at some of the international data. If you look at the TIMSS, the trends in international mathematics and science study, it shows something really interesting. The Asian countries, East Asian countries, Hong Kong, Singapore, the test scores are way above the USA. But if you look at the student surveys, one of them is about confidence. Do you believe you can do this subject? Do you think you're good at this? Then you found something really interesting. American students, they're really bad, but they feel very good. So this is the shocking part, you know. So I may be wrong, but that's how I feel. You know, I'm feeling confident. I'm feeling very good about this. Then if you go through the data, you will find out the same thing. 2011 data. If you look at all the Asian countries score so much higher than the Anglo-Saxon countries, score so much higher. But look at their confidence level. It's much lower. And do they value the subjects? No, they don't. By the way, Singapore has changed a lot, actually, over the past several decades. It's quite fascinating to look at all those numbers. So on the one hand, the question you want to ask, you want scores, you want confidence. And more recent research about creativity said, oh, I want confidence. I want people said, I believe I can do it, especially when you're adults. So you are in society, you may not know much math, but if you need it and you believe you can learn it, it's probably easier to do than when you're younger, just getting the good grades. And then this kind of data, you know, you look at the correlation. The TIMSS data, Tom Lovelace run the same data. Because Tom Lovelace, a lot of Americans, they say, oh, our students have low scores because they love the subjects too much. Doesn't it mean we need to make our kids hate the subjects so they can get scores up? What makes sense? So they have begun to dive into more of this international studies to say, what does it really mean behind it? So in the end, I want you to think about it. I wrote a book about this, but 2 years ago, published by the Teachers College Press. So what works may hurt. It basically means in education, you have so many different educational outcomes. If you pursue one, if a pedagogy or educational system makes one work well, it might hurt other indicators. So I've been looking at data, for example, PISA math scores and perceived entrepreneurial capability. It's all negative. It's all negative. That is, PISA scores have a negative correlation with entrepreneurship indicators. Means the higher the PISA scores of a country, the less entrepreneurial students become, and the less creative they become. Why is that? So that basically means an education system, when you are moving toward one goal, you might hurt other goals. And later on in big PISA, this year's PISA data, for example, it says a fear of failure is negatively correlated with average reading performance. That is, if a student is afraid of failure, and I'm sorry, is positively correlated with the reading, your test scores go higher. And you said, look at it, here's Hong Kong. Yes, your students are afraid of failure, but they score high. They don't like it. Then, of course, PISA has another measure. They began, by the way, I have to claim this. They adopted because I've been critical of PISA for a long time to say, they said, okay, let's look at student well-being, students' life satisfaction. You saw this negative correlation. That is, students who have higher test scores, China, Hong Kong, Macau, have lower life satisfaction. Why is that? That is, so can these outcomes go together? Or maybe they cannot go together. So when people, in the US talk about social emotional learning or social emotional well-being, they want to teach a course. Let's teach students to have social emotional well-being. I said, don't teach that, because it's the teaching, the learning approach you're taking is hurting the students. When you're trying to teach social emotional learning, you're hurting them more. You're not helping them. And instead, so you need to change the educational outcomes. And then, of course, there's other things that I've tracked down in my data. They say, we've been arguing for, we want students to be 4 C's. Collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, and communication. And now Michael Fullen says we need to have 6 C's. So he would add character and content. English is a good language. You can have many C's. And I joked with Michael Fullen. I said, why don't you, you could be adding 8 C's. You add China and Canada. You can keep going with this. But the overall idea is people say, okay, we got the 4 C's. Everybody should have the 4 C's. But do the 4 C's really go together? What if someone is extremely, let's say, extremely collaborative and critical thinking, but they're not really good at creativity in the high end? Actually, they don't go together. You cannot possibly have everybody to be equally good or equally bad at the same thing. You can't just say, okay, let's teach 4 C's. Then you'll be 25% collaboration, 25%, critical thinking. You can't do that. Actually, human beings are different, like we said. The same thing, what if this model, students might work differently. So there's very different things to think about outcomes. When you have one approach, there's no one approach that serves all students, serves all education outcomes. Another reason, actually, I'm not putting on the slides. In my book, I wrote about something called productive failures and productive failures, or successful or unproductive success. So like direct instruction, you teach somebody something, they can remember it now. That's very successful, better than inquiry-based learning. But that in terms of transfer of knowledge, if you measure about half a year later, the knowledge is gone. It's not very useful. So it's successful, but unproductive. They have other teaching methods that drives you to say, okay, the learning may be slower, but in the long run lasts longer. Now, but this diagram shows another model, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with now. In education, we like to have this kind of diagrams to say, oh, we got 0.5 correlation, very good. But look at this 3 students. Students from here, they're all in a negative domain. That is, these people are being hurt. It's like you have a vaccination or medicine. If the medicine kills 3 people but saved 7 people, is it good medicine? For the 7, yes. But for the 3, it's bad. What works may hurt. So what this idea is this: in schools, when you're teaching all these children, we have to keep in mind, schools serve many, many outcomes. We have short-term outcomes, long-term outcomes. Especially that's why I want teachers, educators to remember, most schools will watch for short-term outcomes. For example, because we have a course is 1 semester. Then if we're serious, we go to half a semester, we give a test. 1 week, we give a test. But in the long run, is that meaningful? For example, is it as important for students to remember how many presidents we have in the US? Or is it more important for them to keep a strong, positive attitude towards your history course? In teaching language, it's the same thing. I know in Hong Kong, you do bilingual. Is it important for the children to memorize all the words, the grammatical rules you should try to teach them in 1 semester, but then they began to hate the subject? They lose confidence in the subject. What matters? So we have instructional outcomes. We have educational outcomes. We have the cognitive outcomes. Is it important for you to remember how to do something? Or is it important for you to remember that you actually want to do it? You can do something versus you want to do something. Is it important for you to memorize all the knowledge? Or is it important for you to remember the curiosity? So that's the differences. Now in education, I've laid out 2 things now. Children, naturally born learners, diverse learners, intentional learners. I've also said in a traditional way of measurement in education, we do not measure all outcomes. We as educators, as parents, we have to make choices about outcomes. What matters to you? I know in Hong Kong, a lot of parents worry about what's my child getting? You know, in 1st grade, what their grades, 2nd grade, what their grades, even though we know in the long run, life is a marathon, but we worry about the short term, not long term. So now I'm going to present you another thing. Things have changed. So interesting book a while back published by 2 economists from Harvard, Claudia Golden and Lawrence Katz. It's a fascinating book. It's an economist book. It talks about the race between education and technology. Their basic argument is that education runs against technology. Technology always advances. When technology moves forward and causes a big revolution, it redefines what we should learn. Education should try to catch up to that. And if education doesn't, we have a big problem. You know, I remember I was born in a Chinese village. This actually is quite interesting. I joke about this, which is kind of true. I should thank water buffaloes. When I was born in Sichuan, a little village, I was very bad at riding a water buffalo or doing any of my farming work. That's when my father said, why don't you go to school? So I'm glad I went to school because I was really bad at everything in the village. I was not good at village stuff either. Remember, that's in the 1970s I went to school. And there was no pathway towards college. Simply I was avoiding the countryside stuff. But luckily, society's changed. And in the farming skills, other guys learned was not as important as what I learned. So that's the shifting of knowledge. So let's take a look at the new shifting of our society right now. We all know artificial intelligence, big data is coming. The 4th industrial revolution is coming. Automation is on the verge. I was reading a report from McKinsey in 2017. They predict 800 million jobs, 1/3 of the world's jobs will be shifted. Recent data from COVID says over 44% of jobs will be at home. All big changes, massive shifts. And now what's the big change? That's artificial intelligence. You look at artificial intelligence, this is actually quite fascinating. This is from a study of the Brookings Institute. The Brookings basically analyze the data to say, they look at patents of artificial intelligence to say what kind of jobs the patent application says the artificial intelligence will do. Then they analyze the data in the labor statistics. What kind of jobs or tasks are being done by people? Then I did the comparison. You can see this very clearly. The biggest impact of artificial intelligence will not be on less than high school, or some college. It will be on bachelor's degrees and graduate programs. This is quite shocking because previous automations have replaced jobs of high school people, some college, not affecting college graduates. I know a lot of people who listen today who are in the audience probably are thinking about going to college. I mean, you have children going to college, going to graduate degree, but that's where this biggest impact will be. And that impact is going to be, look at female, Asian Americans will be affected among most because we hold some of the high paid, highly educated jobs. Accounting, that's one of them. Banking, that's another one, the medicine. That's all these jobs. So what's happening now is basically what's patent jobs, mechanical jobs, predictable jobs. Like let's, for example, if you read in medical, if you read X-rays, those kind of jobs are probably going to be reduced and changed. So what the future society will need is basically we're going to have millions and millions kind of jobs, but each job will only require a few people. That's what the future will be actually. So because before we used to have a fewer jobs, but jobs require millions of people. The future will be a big shift. So in essence, what the future will be needing is creative, entrepreneurial, and globally minded individuals who are diverse and unique and social and emotionally healthy. I want to emphasize diverse and unique. That's where our future will be. Remember I said when our children come in, they are already diverse, they are already unique, they are intentional. And if they're intentional, they're naturally creative, and we need them to become more entrepreneurial. So this comes to say, okay, our education in the future is about supporting individuals to have a great talent. This is a wonderful book. How do you create talent? It's basically the 3 T's. And basically you have to have a natural born talent. That's why I never try to play soccer or football. I'm going to be killed on the football field. I'm trying to find where I have talent. Then you need to spend time. We joke about 10,000 hours is a good time. Well, 9,000 hours might work. You just need to spend time on that talent. Then good teaching. Good teaching is multiple variations, lots of experiences. So there's 3 T's. So try to find out what you're good at, spend time on that, become unique and talented. That's where you need to be. But that's also only think about employability, that you will create the jobs. You don't look for jobs, you create jobs. But you need to think about happiness. So this is another part of it. In the 21st century, we want people to be happy. How do you make them to be happy? Well, happiness comes from Maslow's talk. A musician must make music, artist must paint, poet must write. This is if you want to be ultimately at peace with yourself. What a man can be, he must be. This is called self-actualization. This line of research is carried on by positive psychologists like Martin Seligman talk about use your signature strength and virtues in the service of something much larger than you are. So that's the creativity piece. Can you create value for other people using your strength? So here's what I come up with the book. What the future needs. Can you help each child to become unique and great. And everybody can be great because that person is unique. You have nobody to compare to. You know, if you are good at something, you cannot be a second person. Have you noticed nowadays, you know, people trying to mimic in some movie stars, it never work because you have one unique person to become unique and great. And you find something you're passionate about or you're good at. And then you, through entrepreneurial creative skills, talents, you create something valuable for other people. That is the future of education can be. So what the future of education could be like, I just made this is my new book. I just finished this one book. My one book is called Learners Without Borders. It's coming up next year. So I had to just imagine, what if we have a curriculum like this? You got 30% of a national curriculum, which transmits the most basic requirements of our nations. I call that floor expectations. That is the social values, cultural values, literacy, and numeracy. They have a school mandated curriculum. That every school represents a local community, a group of parents. So if the national curriculum is 30%, local schools 30%, then you got 40% personal. That makes you successful. This national curriculum school mandate makes you a person to live in a society. What makes you individual and different is the personal curriculum. So that is what I think, you know, you can be. I've documented a lot of schools for doing what I describe in a book that's published actually before the COVID crisis. If you get a chance, you can read this. In this book, we documented individual students are making the fight to be individuals. Teachers are creating opportunities. Schools are doing this, and groups of schools are making similar things. But in the end, I want to emphasize one more thing. The whole idea came from a book I just wrote with Michael Weinmeier. We just published this, actually. This is from ASCD. We focus on, you want students to be self-determined learners. That means they are the owners of their own learning. They own their own learning. They come to school, school serve them. They will be driven by their interest, by their talent, and they work with schools to make that happen. So this is how we want our students to be successful in the future. So I hope that helps to say self-determined learners, individuals, diversity, and they are going to become creative and entrepreneurial. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zhao, for your inspiring lecture. It's now time for the Q&A session. Please type your questions in the Q&A chat box so that we can read them out for you. The raise hand function will not be responded.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for that provocative talk. And just this idea of 40%, which is not even half, right? 40% of a child's education being made up of personal choice in some sense is probably very, very scary to everyone, teachers, but also learners, because I think that we're not accustomed as learners to having a lot of choice in our learning. So I have lots of questions, but I see lots of them in the chat box as well. So let me just start with a couple, and then we can have some sort of back and forth. So here's a question from Kate Searson, and she asks, in a practical sense, how does personalizable education combine with a need to have a functional level of literacy and numeracy? So this, you know, in some sense, the floor that you were talking about, how do those things come together? And she also talks about the fact that you say you're bad at maths, but you have enough maths to analyze statistics. So obviously you're not as bad as some of us may feel we are. So what level of literacy and numeracy do you think students need before they can branch off? And maybe I'll add to that question. Is it a one comes before the other? that you have to have the foundation first before.
Thank you. That's a question. As I've paid the person ask the question, I was so happy that someone asked that question. First of all, let me actually say a little bit about my math. I was really bad at math. Seriously, why I choose to learn English is because if I choose to study English to pass the college entrance exam in 1982 in China, you don't have to take the math test. So math did not count as a total score. I avoided that. And how bad I was? I got a 3 out of 100. If you know math, that's pretty bad. Okay, 3 out of 100. I can tell you another person who got a 3 out of 100 is